Hello everyone, this is Starry Ari's ASMR. I am Ari, and today in this video I want to do a little bit of a meal planning tutorial, or like a showing you how to meal plan. Every month I do a monthly meal calendar, and I do a video of me filling it out, and I know lots of people really enjoy those videos, and I thought, kind of in the spirit of a new year, and I know lots of people are, making some goals and resolutions for themselves, and I think that kind of goals around eating and meal planning and maybe eating out less, I think those are pretty common, and I figured I would just kind of do a quick overview type of video. It's not really going to go like too in depth. I have a little bit of an outline of what I want to talk about, but I'm probably going to ramble a lot in between that. So I want to kind of talk about grocery budgets, how to gather meal ideas, how to actually meal plan, and tips for making your grocery list and doing the shopping, kind of all of that good stuff. And I will have some timestamps for the different steps so that you can just kind of skip around as you want. And this is mostly going to be, like, for my household, we mostly use a meal calendar just to plan dinners, but this could be expanded. Like, all of these steps could be expanded to planning, multiple meals per day. We just don't typically do that. And, if you feel like you don't need to meal plan, or parts of this video, like, it just doesn't make sense for your household, like, that's perfectly fine, right? Like, different households are going to have different needs, and just make adjustments for what works best for you, or just use this video purely for relaxation. And I really liked this idea for a video because I actually have lots of experience from a previous job helping people set up life skills like this that work for them. Most of those situations were quite collaborative. I didn't just talk at them for however long this video is going to be, but I know personally that lots of people were never explicitly taught how to do some of these things, and that it can just be really intimidating to have to figure them out on your own. I'm hoping that maybe this ASMR format will be a little bit more relaxing and help you learn kind of from a place of calm rather than stress. So I will briefly talk about my own household, like my own personal budget. So if you get weird about other people's finances, this might not be the video for you. I'm just trying to give a realistic idea of how my specific household handles our meal planning for dinners. This is not specific to low income or low budget planning, but I do have some tips to share just from information I've gathered or things that we personally, had to do in the past. I know that all of this can feel like a lot of time and energy investment at the beginning of the process, but it really does eventually taper out once you get the system set up and in place. And having a consistent practice like this where you front load the effort really helps, at least for me, take off the daily mental load of constantly thinking about meals and thinking about grocery shopping. So I have some note cards here and a little pen. I don't know why I was going to put that back off to the side. So I have some note cards here that are all blank. So I thought as I'm going along, I'm just going to write, I don't know exactly what I'm going to write, just I think the main steps here. So so that it's kind of easy and visual if you're wanting to like watch the video as well. So I think the first thing to talk about before meal planning at all is a budget. I'm just gonna write budget. And I feel like that looks funky, but hopefully you can read my handwriting. So creating a budget, I think, is really, really helpful because it gives you an idea of exactly what types of meals to plan for and kind of what you can afford, just looking at your personal budget, you know. And for my household, it is just my husband and myself, so it's just a household of 2 people. And we typically budget about $600 for our monthly grocery budget. In the last year, we actually kind of slowly increased it a bit just because, you know, things are generally more expensive. And our personal grocery budget includes household items like, you know, paper towels, toilet paper, cleaning supplies, things like that. But we have a separate budget for like restaurants or eating out, getting coffee, things like that. And it is much lower than our grocery budget. That kind of fluctuates every month. But also, we are not really a big, heavy, like snacking household. So we don't really get too many like snacky foods, sodas, treats. You know, we'll treat ourselves every now and then, but for the most part, we are kind of an ingredient household. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. In my adult life, I have gone from, you know, having to specifically shop like only the sales in the like discount grocery stores, like Grocery Outlet, to now, you know, being able to just kind of plan what we want within reason. So I'm incredibly fortunate and grateful to be in that position now. And our budget increases and decreases depending on the month. Like if we have any celebrations, or maybe we know that we're going to be traveling, so we need to eat out a lot more. We do reconcile our budget after the end of each month to kind of see where we landed, if we need to make any realistic adjustments. So at the beginning of the year, we were noticing we were going over our previous budget just for basic groceries, and we really wanted to make sure that we were budgeting appropriately and being realistic about what we needed to get. And an example of that is in November, we spent about $525 in groceries, but we had some nicer meals out. Like we ate out at some restaurants to celebrate finishing my master's degree. So we had a bit of that extra, like we planned a bit of extra from our grocery budget to move into our restaurant budget because we knew that we were going to want to eat out at some nicer places. So that just got added to our regular restaurant budget to kind of help supplement that a little bit. And if you're like not even sure where to start with a budget at all, or what could be considered reasonable for your household size, the USDA puts out food plan like cost estimates at different budget levels, and that could be helpful just to get an idea of kind of what to expect. But it obviously varies, you know, depending on your needs and your location. Of course, you know, some places are a lot higher cost to live in than others. So that's all kind of something that you're gonna have to adjust and think about on your own. So when you are budgeting, it is good to kind of think about how many people are in the household. And for us, we love to do leftovers. So we like to make meals that are quite a lot more than what we would just need for that one meal. So, you know, is everyone in your household okay with eating leftovers, or do you need to make a new meal like every day? And I do have a few kind of budget friendly tips when you're meal planning. And if you are shopping sales, like sales at the grocery store, or you have to shop like weeks in advance, you can certainly use frozen fruits and veggies and proteins if you want, just because it is so much easier to plan meals further out or just plan with what the sales have, and then you can just stock up on those frozen foods compared to, you know, fresh produce that you need to use like right away. And there are lots of online resources for how to shop for groceries on, you know, lower budgets. There's a great subreddit that I think is just called like Budget Food, and it has really good ideas there, good recipes. There are also some YouTube channels that are focused on budget friendly meals, and there's one, I think her name is Julia Pacheco or something like that. I'll link her in the description, but I have followed her for quite a while, and she does like very like basic but simple and like delicious looking filling meals for families on a budget. And so it usually kind of looks like ingredients that like I regularly would use anyways. Lots of like beans, rice, pastas, good veggies, lots of frozen veggies sometimes, and you know, proteins that are like pretty like accessible. So I really like looking for suggestions for meals there, even if I'm not on as strict of a budget as, you know, I used to be in the past. It's still really good. I'm not, you know, opposed to saving money where we can. And then, you know, at the end of the month, if you find that you're consistently struggling to make it to the end of the month, or you're just having a really hard time, please consider supplementing some of your staples from food pantries or food banks. You know, like lots of communities have them. They're there to be used. You can access them for free. And, you know, the food and those community resources are there to be taken. And I personally want to build and live in communities where my neighbors can get access to, you know, the resources that they need to help their families before they ever get to the point of like truly struggling. So, you know, if you need to stock up on beans and rice, pastas, like shelf stable foods like that, like please check out your food pantries if you're finding that you're struggling by the end of your, you know, your budget. So this is the first thing, is just to create a budget for your household and to just be realistic about what you need to spend to meet your nutritional goals and like what is realistic for your family. If you're a family that snacks, like that's great. Just make sure that, you know, you have it in your budget. So that's the first thing there. And then after you come up with a budget, you are going to gather meal ideas. And this can kind of go hand in hand with the budgeting, because sometimes you need to know what meals that you're doing in order to have an idea of what your budget should be. So you can do this with just a physical list. You can do it with note cards like this. Just have one meal on each note card. I know some people do it on like popsicle sticks, like they write a meal on popsicle sticks and then they like, you know, pick ones out at random from a jar. My household has a list on my phone. It's just like a digital list that we add to and we make notes on. And then when we are meal planning, my husband and I will just kind of scroll through that list. I'll hand him my phone and he just kind of, you know, thinks about what he wants and what's coming up that month. And then I will look at it, see what I want, and kind of go back and forth like that. And this list can be like regular meals that you already make. If your family loves tacos and spaghetti or hamburgers or whatever, like make sure that that's in your meal list, because it's really helpful to have all of those regular meals that like you know how to make, and you probably realistically don't need to think about them. But for me, it's just so much nicer to have them written down so that when I'm scrolling through the list, I have like, you know, all of my regular options. And you can gather meal ideas from, you know, cookbooks. If you have cookbooks that you don't really use very often, like just take a flip through them one afternoon, put little sticky tabs on them with some meals that you would like to make at some point. You can also check Pinterest. I get a lot of meal ideas from Pinterest and Reddit. There are, again, lots of good subreddits. There's another one, I think it's dinner, like suggestions or dinner ideas, I think is maybe what that one's called. And it, you know, has what it sounds like. It has dinner ideas on it. And I think I'm probably going to say this a lot, but again, be realistic. Like, focus on what is realistic for you, what actually makes sense for your lifestyle. My list has like tons of like instant pot, easy throw together meals, lots of like casseroles, very like quick, simple, like stovetop meals, compared to, you know, like we do have some, but a lot fewer, like intense, lots of prep, like very hands-on meals, because that is just like our lifestyle. We both like cooking, but we're not to that extent where we need to like have it be a challenge every time. And so that's just realistic for us. So most of our meals, you know, tend to be like those easier, like what can we do typically in like 30 minutes, but realistically maybe like less than an hour or something like that. We like to have a good mix of meals that give us lots of leftovers. And then also, I have tons of meals on our list that are really good for like when we don't need leftovers, you know, like if we're about to leave on a trip or something like that. And we really like to do meals that we're like not going to dread putting together. And then usually we'll add in like one or two new or more complicated meals kind of like thrown in each month. But yeah, like I was saying, we use lots of Instant Pot meals. We do a lot of air fryer meals. Again, really simple like stovetop recipes that just kind of works best for us. So, you know, it's good to have those ambitious meals on your list, but make sure that you're also having lots of those realistic meals that you're actually going to want to take the effort to cook on a weekday. And then kind of optional for budgeting, if you're really having to stick to a strict budget for each meal, you can kind of figure out roughly, just like go on your grocery store's website or go on like walmart.com just to get an idea of like what a basic price would be for an ingredient, so that you can kind of figure out roughly how much money each meal takes to make. And then that kind of helps you balance your budget and lets you prioritize those like much more realistic meals. And if you're making meals that you're just kind of like about, but you're noticing that it's like costing quite a bit, or those ingredients are getting higher in price, then like maybe you're gonna want to make that meal less. And this is a good step where you can get all of your household members involved, especially if everyone has different favorite meals or different meals that they want to try. And, you know, I think I'm usually more interested in trying new stuff than my husband. Like, he's pretty okay just like doing whatever. And so I'm usually the one that will like, hey, I saw this recipe, let's give that a try this month or something. But every time when we are meal planning, you know, like he has some of his favorite meals that he's added to the list. And so it's good that we have meals that we both like. There are some meals that he likes more, that I like more, but we're both like okay with eating them. And I think we honestly have probably a list of about maybe like 40 to 50 meals that we can just scroll through and choose from And we have tons of cookbooks with recipes that we haven't really tried at all. And like I said, I use Pinterest. I find recipes on Instagram, stuff like that too. And if you do make a digital list, like on your phone, you can also add links to those regularly used recipes if you find a recipe online, so that you're not having to like search for it every time. You can just go to your meal list and then just like click on that link and that recipe comes up. Or you can write it out or print it out, you know. I have a little recipe box, so I like to write out recipes every now and then with the really like common recipes that we do. So this is that next step, to gather those meal ideas. And then once you have a good list of meal ideas, now is time for the actual meal planning. I'm just gonna write meal planning. And again, this can be really different for whatever your household needs are. We originally, years ago, started meal planning with just a weekly calendar. And we actually started it because we had roommates, and we would frequently, like one of our roommates, and he's, one of our best friends, but he loved to cook and he was always trying new recipes. And so he would write on the calendar what he was going to be trying that week. And so we knew that we didn't need to like plan our own meal, because like he was, gonna cook and like see what we thought about what he made. And so that just made it so simple for us to kind of coordinate as a household. And then we used just a little like magnetic whiteboard from the Dollar Tree, and it just got hung up on our fridge. And then after we became a bit more like financially settled, and we didn't need to specifically plan around sales as much, or what was in the discount grocery store, we eventually upgraded to doing a full month. And I think that the month is so nice because I only have to think about it, once each month, and then just kind of like go with the flow. And this is a good time to be thinking about, do you have any plans or obligations that might impact making that meal or a meal? And you can, mark any days during that week or that month that you just don't need to plan for. And again, when you're doing this, think about leftovers. My household, like I was saying, is really big on leftovers. We really enjoy a good no cooking day, and so we like to plan for leftovers. I can have the same meal for like lunch and dinner for 3 days in a row. I know not everybody is like that, and it's kind of a little ridiculous that I am, but be realistic about how many days are you willing to eat leftovers, and just kind of think about that for your household as well. Do you have some household members that really don't like leftovers? Because you can still add in like just fend for yourself days, so they don't have to be specifically leftover days, but they could be days where it's like we have leftovers in the fridge, but we're not going to be cooking anything. So if you don't want those leftovers, you gotta figure it out. Make yourself a sandwich or something like that. Like my family growing up had nights like that, and we were all raised like knowing how to cook, and most of the time we would just like make ourselves a sandwich or make just a quick little meal or something like a grilled cheese. So that is an option as well if you have, a mixed household where some people are okay with leftovers, some people aren't. So for your meal planning, this is when you are going to choose those meals from that very convenient list that you gathered. And I am a fan of a list, but you can do like a random, popsicle drawing if you want, or popsicle stick, like drawing, that type of thing. If you want, you can make it random like that, but I am a little bit more strategic, and I like to kind of think about specifically what we are making and when. And you are going to go through your week or your month and figure out each day which meals are going to, go where, and make sure you build in those like leftover or fend for yourself days if that's something that you want to do. And another budget tip for this step here is that you can plan meals during each like shopping period that use the same ingredients. So if you have a few meals that use potatoes or specific frozen veggies or something like that, you can buy the larger quantities and save a little bit of money, and just make sure that those ingredients, if you buy a bag of potatoes but you only need a few for one meal, if you have another meal that also needs potatoes, then you can like use up some more of that, and that just overall saves you money and also cuts down on the food waste and food that you're just not getting to use in time. Meal planning can really be helpful with that. Again, be realistic. What days are you more likely to make bigger meals? So like I personally like to do bigger meals on Sundays because usually, my husband and I can work on it together. We usually like to cook together, but we can do kind of more intense meals and we have more time and more prepped, and we're not as stressed like we've had, the whole weekend. So usually we like to do bigger meals on Sundays, and then I usually like to try and do easier meals later in the week because we're usually, more tired and less motivated as the week goes. But just think about, do you have a really busy schedule one week, or are you really going to want to invest a lot of time and energy into a meal on certain days, or are you realistically going to want simple and quick meals that week? So just be honest and realistic about that, as well as how often you want to or plan to eat out or order food in. Just kind of think about whether you need to be planning a meal for every night if you know that you're going to be doing that. Because you don't necessarily want to, plan meals for every single day of the week and then buy all of the ingredients for those meals and then decide, actually I'm really, feeling like I just want to order a pizza or something, and then having some ingredients just go to waste. And of course you can push meals, around. It can be flexible, but I have fallen into the trap sometimes when I'm a little too ambitious and I'm not as realistic about our actual habits and goals. And just make sure you're also, through this process, giving yourself some flexibility, some grace, knowing that you can move those things around, and just kind of plan accordingly for what works best for you and your household. And also, while you're meal planning, this is a great time to take stock of what you already have in your pantry and just kind of make note of, do you have any ingredients that you want to make sure to use, and you can prioritize those. And a little helpful tip for that is that you can actually keep a list of things that you want to use up to kind of guide you. So for example, like if you had some extra pasta or rice from one meal, or you didn't quite use up, all of that chicken broth in your fridge or something like that. I know that I can really easily forget about having some like random pasta that we were gifted, especially if it's on the top shelf or it's like behind other things. And for a lot of our pasta meals, we could probably just like substitute that instead of buying new pasta. So that can be a little helpful budget tip there as well. So that is kind of the meal planning process. If you want to see a little bit more in depth of me thinking through my month, I will go ahead and link my monthly meal calendar playlist, and you can go ahead and check that out. I don't really go like too into detail with those, but that'll at least give a little example of what I do each month. So that is the meal planning step. After you have completed your meal planning for whatever period you're going to be doing, you then need to make your grocery list. I'm gonna say make grocery list. And we do weekly grocery shopping, but we also typically make sure to always have regular pantry staples for us. So things like regular seasonings. We have a decent amount of seasonings that we've just kind of like built up over time that we just regularly replace as we notice that something is getting low. And so we have things like that. We have, flour, sugars, rice, eggs, butter, anything like that that could be used in like most basic recipes for us. And this is something that could be really expensive to initially invest in, especially spices. Like spices are so expensive. But this is something, if you're starting from scratch, each grocery trip you can just do a little bit more if that's within your budget, And again, if you can't afford to stock up on those staples on top of that food budget that you're, having to work in right now, use, food pantries and food banks to help build up your stocks. It is always a good idea to have extra things that you could use to whip up just a very basic meal in the house, just in case. And for this, you can use a physical list if you want. I know that helps a lot of people. I just use a note on my phone. My notes app allows me to do a checklist function so that I can check things off as I get them. And then the next grocery week, I go through that list and just erase things that we don't need. But I can keep things on there that we regularly get. Like each week we tend to get, milk and bread, just like our regular stuff that we kind of always typically need. And I can just go through and easily uncheck them so I don't have to like retype them out every time. And if you are new to making grocery lists, I know some people just kind of go right into the store and just like figure out what they need. That's great for you. I could never. But so if you're new to making a list specifically from recipes, it's really helpful for me to take out each recipe if I have it on a recipe card, or pull out those cookbooks, or pull it up on, my phone and take a look at each of those recipes that I have planned and write down every single ingredient. And then I like even just the really basic ones. And then I go through my fridge and my cupboards to figure out what we already have and what we need to get. And that sounds like a lot, but after a while, like I was saying, these steps all get faster as you get, better and more used to them. And then, make sure that you're writing down all of your staples, things that you need for breakfasts, for lunches, if you want snacks, any extra drinks, things like that. And one really helpful tip for making a good list, a good comprehensive list, is to keep a running household list somewhere accessible, like the front of your fridge, of the things that you need to pick up at the next grocery shopping trip. But the things that you might not regularly check each week. So for example, if we run out of sugar or cooking oil or, a spice like oregano or something like that, it goes on the grocery list because those aren't things that we typically get each week. And so it would be easy for us not to think to check them when we're putting together our list. Another kind of helpful tip for shopping in person is to reorganize your list once you have it all together by department or in the way that you move, through the store. So, for example, like if you always do the produce first, then, have produce higher on the list. And then if you move into pantry items next, like that, have that coming up, so on. And that just kind of helps you be a little bit more efficient in the store. And for me, it kind of keeps me from dreading the entire shopping experience some days. So this is that next step is going to be making your grocery list. And then after you have your list all together, everything that you need to get, you're going to actually do the grocery shopping. grocery shop. And this is a step where, it's going to be individual to you, where you and your household, your family like to do your shopping. But you can also, if it's available to you, you can also use grocery pickup if that's easy. And, if you're really busy, or if you're worried about like impulse buying, like if those impulse buys always get you when you're in the store, maybe doing grocery pickup is going to be a little bit more helpful for you, so that you don't have that chance to swing down that candy aisle or whatever, and then you can make that active choice to get yourself a little treat, when it's like, appropriate, or whenever you decide that you want to actively do that. This is also when you can make use of coupons or grocery sales where you can, but also be aware that you're not just buying things because they're on sale, especially if you don't have a current plan for it. Or unless they're, if they're a part of like your essentials, or if they're like a shelf-stable pantry item that that you're going to use, frozen items, things like that. But if it's not, that could just lead to you spending your money on food that just eventually goes to waste. And I find that having a plan each trip kind of helps me out, like having a meal plan of all of the meals that I know that we're going to make. It really helps me out because I don't just buy it because it's on sale, because I already know like exactly what items I'm actually going to need for that month. Also, everyone has different opinions on this. I have no shame in getting the generic or store brand version versus like a name brand version. And of course, there are some products that I prefer like the taste of, or I think generally works better in the name brand, like detergent, like laundry detergent, I'm a little bit pickier about, or paper towels I'm pickier about. But generally, for like most of our grocery needs, the generic brand works just fine for me. So that is that next step that you're going to do. You're actually going to do that grocery shopping. And then after grocery shopping, this is kind of the last most essential part, is to use your meal plan. You just went through all of that hard work and effort to put this together, so now is the time to actually use it. And this is a great time where you can make adjustments as you go, move meals around as you need to, tell your household member that's constantly bugging you about asking what's for dinner to go check the calendar that you worked hard on. And also, this is good for me, use this to guilt your future self into saving money and eating healthier. I'm not a big fan of like guilting yourself, I'm always trying to like give yourself grace, but this in particular, I have many times thought, like, oh, I'm just kind of feeling a little lazy, like why don't we just order McDonald's or whatever, But then I remember that we already bought the ingredients for this particular meal, and it would just be easier and cheaper just to make it, and it would save us money, and then we could have, that little extra money to use when we actually want maybe a nicer meal out this month. So use that as some motivation if you need to. And, a good reminder that I guess goes back to the meal planning step is to plan to be a little lazy sometimes, so that, you can keep things realistic. I think I said realistic 100 times during this video, but I'm just a big fan of being very realistic about what your needs are. There are some days where like I don't want to cook, and I know that, so I like to plan in lots of days during the week where we can always like move things around and order food if we need to or want to, And this is also a great time to reevaluate like what is working, what isn't. During your meal planning process, involve your household. cooking and meal times can be a very culturally dependent experience, but I personally grew up in a household where it was expected that all of us kids had to help while my parents cooked because both of my parents worked. So typically we had dinner a little bit later. And I think that experience really taught all of us kids good life skills that carried us into adulthood. And, especially I have 3 brothers. So I think that in some households it would not be expected that they would learn how to cook. And I think all of my brothers can cook and they're all quite good at it. Also, like involving kids in that meal planning process or gathering meal ideas, I think maybe might make them, more likely to deal with meals during a week if they know that they help to pick them out from that list, or if they have one that they, really want and they know that it's coming up. I know that some families that I've worked with in the past, that was an issue that they had a goal around as a family of like trying to make meal plans less of a fight and that, or meal times less of a fight, and meal planning was really helpful for their household in that way. And, again, figure out what worked and what didn't work for your next planning session. Did you have lots of produce, like fresh produce, go to waste? Then you can maybe think about, start buying frozen where you can so that it doesn't go to waste if you don't use it. And, did one meal give you like way more leftovers than expected? Maybe make note of that on your list for how many days that meal or each meal might be able to last so you can, better plan appropriately in the future. I know that a lot of these steps might seem really basic and simple for a lot of people, but I know personally that there are lots of folks out there that never really had the chance to learn these things. And again, like I was saying at the beginning, I know that doing all of this effort can seem like a lot at the beginning, and this is all something that I've worked on over years. Again, we did not start with a month, we started just with a week and then we eventually expanded. So like, don't be too hard on yourself if doing a month meal plan right off the bat just doesn't work. Scale it back if you need to. My favorite word, be realistic. But I hope that you found some helpful tips, or that this maybe helped guide you through the process in hopefully a relaxing manner. And this whole process is also meant to make your life easier. So if you are finding that it is like stressing you out more, like if it's adding more stress to your life, like make adjustments where you need to, maybe cut back a little bit if you can. Really just set up a process that works best for you and for your household. Definitely feel free to leave any tips or tricks. I think we can all really learn from each other a lot of the time. So if you have also favorite meals, I love gathering new meal ideas. So please feel free to leave them in the comments. But I hope that you enjoyed this video. I really do. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.